They bulldozed my disabled sister's wheelchair ramp at 6 a.m. while she slept inside, then handed her a $2,200 bill for the removal service. What they didn't know? She controls their funding. Picture this: Delilah rolling out in her wheelchair, still in pajamas, watching her independence get destroyed, while our HOA president Bryce stood there smirking with his clipboard. The diesel fumes mixed with the sound of my sister's quiet crying as $8,000 of accessibility equipment became scrap metal. These suburban dictators thought they'd found perfect victims, a disabled woman and her construction worker brother. What they missed was that my quiet government worker sister had been making some very official-sounding phone calls about federal compliance lately. Bryce was about to learn what happens when you bulldoze the wrong person's dignity at dawn. What would you do if someone destroyed your family member's only way into their home? Drop a comment below, because this revenge gets absolutely legendary. Let me back up and tell you how we got here. My name's Marcus, and 3 years ago, life dealt our family a brutal hand. Mom and Dad died in a car crash, leaving me and my sister Delilah these two little houses side by side in Riverside Heights, a modest subdivision in Missouri where folks actually used to look out for each other. Key phrase there: used to. Delilah's always been the smart one. While I was swinging hammers and running construction crews, she went into what she called boring government policy work. Real secretive about it, too. Never talked specifics, just said she helped write regulations and attended meetings. She'd work from home most days, taking these intense phone calls behind her office door. I'd hear her using words like appropriations and federal compliance. Figured she was just really dedicated to whatever bureaucratic paper pushing she did. Then 18 months ago, everything changed. Some drunk idiot T-boned her at the intersection by Miller's grocery store. The smell of burning rubber and twisted metal still haunts that corner. Delilah spent 4 months in the hospital, another 6 in physical therapy, learning to navigate the world from a wheelchair. Those squeaky hospital corridors and the constant beeping of machines became our soundtrack. When she was finally ready to come home, I knew exactly what needed to happen. Spent 3 weeks building her the most beautiful wheelchair ramp you've ever seen. Smooth incline, non-slip surface, even added decorative railings that matched the house. The sweet smell of fresh lumber and the satisfying bite of my circular saw cutting clean lines made it feel like I was building her freedom back, board by board. Cost me $8,000, but seeing her roll up that ramp with tears of relief? Priceless. I filed all the proper permits with the city. Got approved in 2 weeks. Figured the HOA notification was automatic, because apparently I still believed in common sense back then. Enter Bryce Kellerman, the human equivalent of a parking ticket. This 38-year-old insurance adjuster moved here from some fancy suburb 2 years ago, treating Riverside Heights like his personal totalitarian experiment. His wife left him 6 months back, shocking absolutely no one who's watched him measure grass height with an actual ruler. The man fined Mrs. Rodriguez for having Christmas lights up in January. In January, said they violated his precious seasonal decoration timeline. You know the type, always wearing polo shirts tucked into khakis like he's perpetually heading to a country club that won't accept him, driving that pristine white Lexus SUV that's never seen a speck of mud. He's got this nasal voice that makes everything sound like a complaint, and dead fish eyes that light up only when he's ruining someone's day. The morning of the bulldozer ambush, I discovered Delilah never got the HOA architectural review notice. They sent it to 247 Maple Street instead of 274 Maple Street. Simple mistake, right? Ha! Bryce claimed it was willful non-compliance and refused the standard 30-day grace period for retroactive approval. Rules are rules, he sneered, standing there with his clipboard like some wannabe dictator. The crunch of gravel under bulldozer tracks mixed with my sister's quiet sobbing. He actually had the audacity to hand her a bill for $1,200 while she sat there in her pajamas, watching her independence get demolished. Then came the daily fines, $200 every single day until the violation was resolved. Here's what really twisted the knife. Delilah just took it. My fierce, brilliant sister who used to demolish college professors in debates just sat there nodding, asking quietly how long she had to pay. I thought the accident had broken more than her legs. What I didn't know was she was making very different phone calls now. Real quiet conversations behind her office door, speaking in this authoritative government language I'd never heard her use. She'd mentioned budget allocations and federal oversight, but I figured she was researching disability rights lawyers. Poor Bryce had no idea he'd just picked a fight with the wrong family. 72 hours later, Bryce showed up at our door like a loan shark collecting debts, but this time, he brought backup. His buddy Trevor, some sleazy lawyer who looked like he'd learned his trade from late-night TV commercials. The guy's cologne was so strong it could have stripped paint, and his polyester suit practically crackled with static electricity as he strutted up our walkway. "Marcus, Delilah," Bryce said with this smug grin that made me want to rearrange his face. "We need to discuss your situation." The situation? My sister was trapped in her own house because this power-drunk wannabe dictator had bulldozed her accessibility ramp. Trevor pulled out this thick stack of papers, the crisp sound of legal documents rustling in the morning air. "You owe the Homeowners Association $3,400 in fines and removal fees," he announced like he was delivering someone's lottery winnings. "Pay up in 72 hours, or we place a lien on both properties." But wait, it gets better. These geniuses claimed my city-approved permits were fraudulent since I didn't get HOA approval first. Fraudulent, like I was running some kind of wheelchair ramp crime syndicate. Bryce actually threatened to report us to the city for code violations while standing next to the woman who needed the ramp to get in her own front door. The sheer audacity would have been impressive if it wasn't so disgusting. That's when something clicked in my brain. See, I've been in construction for 20 years, and my old foreman used to say something that stuck with me. When someone's throwing rules at you like confetti, check if they're following the same damn rules themselves. So that night, while Delilah was on another one of her mysterious phone calls, this time I heard her mention something about federal grant compliance. I took a little trip to City Hall. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I dug through public records, the musty smell of old filing cabinets filling my nostrils. And what do you know? Our boy Bryce had fast-tracked his own deck edition 8 months ago. Not only did he skip the architectural review, but his precious deck violated setback requirements by 3 whole feet. The man had literally broken the exact same rules he was crucifying us for, except his violation was actually against city code too. I remembered reading somewhere that when HOAs enforce rules selectively like this, they can actually lose their legal authority entirely. Something about equal protection under Missouri law that makes their whole enforcement power null and void. But it gets even juicier. I found 6 other cases where residents had similar oversights with HOA approvals. Every single one got a 30-day grace period to file retroactive paperwork. Every single one except us. The pattern was clear as day. Bryce enforced rules like a drunk referee, selectively and vindictively. Mrs. Patterson got approval for her garden shed 3 months late. No fines. The Johnsons added a pergola without any permits at all, got a friendly reminder letter. But us? Bulldozer at dawn. When I confronted Delilah with my findings, she just smiled this mysterious smile and said, "That's very interesting, Marcus. Very interesting indeed." Then she disappeared into her office for another one of those hushed phone conversations. I caught fragments through the door, pattern of discrimination, and federal funding requirements. I figured she was finally calling those disability lawyers, but something about her tone sounded less like a victim seeking help and more like someone conducting business. Meanwhile, the neighborhood was watching this whole drama unfold like some twisted reality show. Mrs. Morgan had started videotaping everything from her kitchen window. The woman probably had enough footage to make a documentary. Pete from the hardware store dropped by with a bag of screws and an offer to help rebuild the ramp for free. The smell of sawdust and metal polish following him like cologne. "That Kellerman character's been gunning for half the neighborhood," he muttered. "Someone needs to take him down a peg." Even got an anonymous note slipped under our door. "Others have been targeted too. You're not alone." Someone was building a resistance movement in Riverside Heights, and we were apparently the poster children. But Bryce wasn't done flexing his imaginary muscles. The daily fines kept accumulating like interest on a loan shark's debt. We were up to $1,000 and climbing. He even filed a formal complaint with city inspectors trying to get my construction license pulled over unpermitted work. The irony? While he was busy trying to destroy my livelihood, my sister was sitting in her wheelchair, methodically building what looked like the world's most comprehensive case file. Every conversation documented, every interaction recorded, every legal precedent researched. She worked with the focused intensity of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. "Just let the system work," she'd tell me when I got too fired up. What none of us realized yet was that Delilah wasn't just building a defense, she was preparing to drop a nuclear bomb on Bryce Kellerman's little kingdom. 2 weeks later, Bryce orchestrated what can only be described as a public execution disguised as an HOA meeting. The community center reeked of stale coffee and industrial carpet cleaner as 40-plus residents filed in, the buzz of fluorescent lights overhead adding to the tension like we were about to witness a gladiator match. He'd set up this whole theatrical presentation complete with a PowerPoint slideshow titled Maintaining Community Standards, because apparently humiliating disabled people requires professional graphics now. "Ladies and gentlemen," Bryce began, clicking through photos of our destroyed ramp with the enthusiasm of a wildlife photographer showing off dead elephants. "We're here tonight to discuss the consequences of ignoring established protocols." The projectors fan whirred as he displayed before and after shots of Delilah's front yard, calling her accessibility ramp an unauthorized eyesore and a safety hazard to neighborhood children. Safety hazard? The thing was built to ADA specifications with handrails smoother than his precious Lexus's paint job. But here's where it got really ugly. He actually said, and I quote, "Some residents seem to think they can refuse to follow simple rules like everyone else, then play the victim when held accountable." The way he emphasized some residents while staring directly at Delilah made my blood pressure spike to stroke levels. She sat there in her wheelchair, taking notes with this eerily calm expression, like she was studying a particularly fascinating species of poisonous snake. That's when I stood up with my own little surprise. See, I'd spent the past 2 weeks doing more than just feeling sorry for myself. I'd been channeling my inner detective. The satisfying click of my laptop opening echoed through the suddenly quiet room as I revealed photo after photo of Bryce's 3-foot setback violation. "Funny thing about rules, Bryce," I said, letting each word hang in the air like smoke. "They work both ways." The sharp intake of breath from the audience was music to my ears. I laid out the whole pattern like a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. 8 other residents with similar permit oversights, all granted retroactive approval, except us. Mrs. Patterson's shed, the Johnsons' pergola, even old Mr. Kim's koi pond that was technically violating a drainage easement. Every single one got the friendly treatment while we got the bulldozer express. I remembered something my construction law instructor used to say. When associations pick and choose which rules to enforce, they're basically admitting the rules don't actually matter, which can void their entire authority structure under state law. But Bryce, slick as a politician during election season, had prepared for this possibility. My deck addition was pre-approved through verbal consultation with the previous board, he claimed, producing exactly 0 documentation to support this convenient memory lapse. Then he pulled out his ace card. 5 property investors who'd been quietly buying up houses in the neighborhood, all suddenly very interested in maintaining upscale standards. These vultures wanted Riverside Heights gentrified faster than a Starbucks opening in a small town. The motion to table discussion pending legal review passed 7-5, with Bryce's investor buddies providing the swing votes like a rigged poker game. But that wasn't enough for our boy wonder. As his final power move, he announced that daily fines were increasing to $500 as an emergency measure. The sound of that gavel hitting the podium felt like a judge sentencing us to financial execution. That's when something beautiful and terrifying happened. Delilah wheeled herself up to the microphone for the first time since this whole nightmare began. Her voice was steady, almost conversational, as she spoke about dignity and federal oversight of community organizations. Nothing dramatic, just a quiet woman casually mentioning how interesting it was that associations accepting federal funding had to comply with disability rights laws. She asked pointed questions about parliamentary procedure and grant compliance that made Bryce's left eye start twitching like he'd developed a nervous condition. After the meeting, the neighborhood dynamics shifted like tectonic plates. Several residents approached Delilah, sharing their own harassment stories in hushed, conspiratorial tones. Mrs. Rodriguez whispered about being fined for unapproved garden gnomes. Apparently, lawn decorations were now threats to community stability. The young Morrison family mentioned threats over their kids' sidewalk chalk art, because nothing says property values like criminalizing childhood creativity. That night, a Facebook group called Riverside Heights Residents United appeared and gained 200 members by morning. Mrs. Morgan had been busy building a digital resistance network while documenting everything on her security cameras. Even Jamie from our local paper started sniffing around, asking uncomfortable questions about HOA finances that made Bryce's polo shirts seem to shrink a size. Meanwhile, our fines climbed past $1,500, and Bryce hired private security to patrol like we were living under martial law. But every night, behind her closed office door, Delilah continued those mysterious phone calls with an authority that would have impressed a Fortune 500 CEO. What I didn't realize was that my quiet sister wasn't just fighting back. She was positioning pieces on a chessboard that existed in dimensions Bryce couldn't even imagine. 3 days after the meeting, Bryce crossed the line from petty tyrant to full-blown psychopath. I woke up to find a city inspector red-tagging Delilah's house for accessibility non-compliance, the same house that needed the ramp these monsters had destroyed. The inspector looked like he wanted to disappear into the pavement as he explained that someone had filed a complaint claiming the house violated occupancy requirements for disabled residents. The irony was so thick you could have choked on it, but that was just the opening act. Bryce had somehow convinced a judge to grant him a restraining order against me for harassment and intimidation. Apparently, presenting evidence of his violations at a public meeting now constituted stalking in his twisted universe. The sheriff serving the papers looked embarrassed, the smell of fresh legal ink mixing with his obvious discomfort as he mumbled apologies about paperwork games and lawyers run amok. The restraining order was pure fiction, claims about threatening phone calls and menacing behavior that read like a bad movie script. I couldn't come within 100 feet of Bryce or any HOA property, effectively banning me from half my own neighborhood. Meanwhile, he was spreading poison faster than a medieval plague, telling anyone who'd listen that we were professional victims seeking lawsuit settlements, funded by radical disability organizations trying to destroy traditional communities. That's when my construction background saved my neck again. 20 years of dealing with crooked contractors taught me that when someone's flinging legal papers like confetti, you follow the money trail. So while Delilah took another mysterious call, this time discussing federal oversight protocols with the authority of someone who actually understood bureaucratic machinery, I went hunting for Bryce's financial secrets. What I found made my blood run cold. His silent partner contracting company had been awarded every single HOA maintenance contract for 18 months straight, $50,000 for landscaping that should have cost $15,000. 3 emergency tree removals at $8,000 each when Pete's nephew would have done it for $1,200 total. A fountain repair requiring $15,000 in specialized equipment to basically change a pump. This wasn't just price gouging. This was systematic theft wrapped in official paperwork. I remembered reading about these kickback schemes in trade magazines, where officials create inflated contracts and pocket the difference, which constitutes fraud that can trigger federal racketeering charges when it involves government grants. When I showed Delilah the evidence, her smile turned positively predatory. "That's extremely valuable information, Marcus," she said with the satisfaction of someone confirming a theory rather than learning something new. Then came another call, this time mentioning federal fraud investigations and appropriations violations, like she was coordinating with law enforcement rather than researching legal options. The neighborhood had transformed into something resembling occupied territory. Security cameras sprouted on Bryce's property like mechanical mushrooms, their red eyes tracking our every movement. Private guards made wellness checks twice daily, intimidation tactics disguised as community safety. The rhythmic thud of their boots on concrete became our soundtrack of oppression. He even tried having Delilah's medical equipment delivery towed, claiming it blocked emergency vehicle access on our own driveway. But here's what really twisted the knife. He pressured neighbors to file noise complaints about Delilah's wheelchair. Her wheelchair. The sound of someone trying to navigate their own home was apparently disturbing the peace. Mrs. Patterson actually apologized while filing the complaint, whispering that Bryce threatened to fine her for pet violations if she didn't cooperate. The man had turned our entire community into his personal police state. Yet somehow Delilah seemed to grow stronger with each attack. While neighbors scurried past our house like we had something contagious, she methodically requested HOA financial records under state transparency laws, asking surgical questions about federal grant compliance that made board members sweat through their polo shirts. Her office had evolved into something resembling a war room, with spreadsheets tracking every violation and legal documents organized with military precision. The fines climbed past $2,500, accumulating like interest on a devil's bargain. Bryce filed complaints with state licensing boards, trying to destroy my business over fraudulent applications. Every sunrise brought fresh legal harassment, but every sunset brought those cryptic phone calls where Delilah mentioned Sacramento and D.C. like she was coordinating operations with federal agencies. Mrs. Morgan's security cameras captured Bryce conducting midnight property inspections with a flashlight, prowling around like some demented suburban ghost. Pete offered to accidentally back a lumber truck into him, but I knew we had to stay clean. The bastard was trying to provoke us into something stupid that would justify his legal crusade. What I didn't understand yet was that every harassment incident, every fraudulent document, every abuse of power was being cataloged by someone who knew exactly how to weaponize this evidence. Bryce thought he was crushing neighborhood troublemakers, but he was actually documenting his own federal crimes, one vindictive act at a time. The prey was about to become the predator, and the hunter had no idea he was already in the crosshairs. The moment that changed, everything happened because I'm an idiot who doesn't knock. I was bringing Delilah her morning coffee, the familiar smell of French roast mixing with the sound of her keyboard clicking away, when I walked straight into her video conference. The screen showed something that made my brain completely malfunction. Governor Delilah Morrison, Budget Committee meeting, in official Missouri state letterhead, with my wheelchair-bound sister speaking with the authority of someone who actually ran the damn state. I stood there like a deer in headlights, coffee mug frozen halfway to my lips, watching my quiet government policy worker sister casually discuss federal appropriations with a room full of suits who kept calling her governor and ma'am. The taste of coffee turned bitter in my mouth as I realized I'd been treating the second most powerful person in Missouri like she needed my protection to handle a neighborhood bully. "Marcus," she said calmly, turning from the screen with that mysterious smile finally making perfect sense, "we should probably talk." The truth hit me like a sledgehammer to the skull. Delilah had been the governor of Missouri this entire time, working remotely since her accident to avoid the media circus that follows every gubernatorial breath. While I thought she was researching disability lawyers, she'd been coordinating with federal investigators. Those mysterious phone calls about appropriations and oversight. She wasn't learning about government processes, she was running them. "You've been the governor?" I croaked out, feeling like the world's most spectacular fool. "The actual governor?" "Second term," she confirmed with maddening calm while my entire worldview collapsed like a house of cards in a hurricane. "And before you ask, yes, I've been fully aware that Bryce's little kingdom received $280,000 from my community development fund last year." The power shift was so dramatic I got dizzy. We hadn't been helpless victims getting steamrolled by a petty dictator. We'd been holding a nuclear weapon while he threw pebbles. The man had systematically harassed the person who controlled $50 million in annual HOA funding statewide, completely oblivious that he was attacking someone who could end his entire operation with a phone call. "Every federal dollar flowing to housing associations in Missouri requires my approval," Delilah continued, the authority in her voice now making perfect sense. "The grant agreement mandates ADA compliance and anti-discrimination measures. Bryce hasn't just been violating civil rights, he's been breaching a state contract while documenting his own crimes." She pulled up files revealing months of meticulous evidence gathering, not just for our case but for systematic abuse across the state. The Attorney General was already building investigations based on her documentation, targeting 47 problematic HOAs receiving government grants. This wasn't about personal revenge. It was about creating legal precedent to protect vulnerable residents everywhere. "Why the hell didn't you tell me?" I demanded, waves of relief and fury crashing together in my chest. "I've been losing sleep for months thinking we were powerless." "Because your genuine outrage was essential," she explained, her political instincts showing through. "Your authentic anger built the community support we needed. Plus, I wanted to document exactly how far these small-time tyrants will go when they think they're attacking defenseless people." The beautiful irony made me want to laugh and cry simultaneously. Bryce had been creating his own prosecution file, methodically documenting federal violations while thinking he was teaching troublemakers a lesson. Civil rights violations, grant fraud, systematic harassment, all committed against a sitting governor who'd been taking notes. "So what happens now?" I asked, still processing that my sister had been playing chess on a board I couldn't even see. Delilah's smile turned absolutely savage, the look of someone about to enjoy delivering justice. "Now we show Mr. Kellerman what real power actually looks like." What I thought was my sister's home office turned out to be a command center that would have made NASA's mission control look like a lemonade stand. Maps covered one wall showing 47 problematic HOAs across Missouri, each marked with colored pins like a serial killer's trophy room. A whiteboard tracked federal grant violations with the obsessive detail of someone plotting world domination, and enough secure phones to run a small country lined her desk. The hum of encrypted communication equipment mixed with the smell of fresh coffee and impending justice. "Welcome to the war room," Delilah said with a grin that could have lit up the state capitol. "Hope you're ready to see how real power operates." The allies she'd assembled made our neighborhood resistance look like kids playing army. Patricia Vance, who I thought was just a civil rights lawyer taking pity on us, turned out to be on the state attorney general's rapid response team for federal violations. Jamie, our local reporter, had been investigating HOA abuse statewide as part of a coordinated media strategy that reached all the way to the governor's press office. Even Mrs. Morgan's obsessive video documentation was part of an evidence-gathering operation sophisticated enough to impress federal prosecutors. "The legal strategy is beautiful in its simplicity," Patricia explained, spreading documents like she was dealing cards in the world's most expensive poker game. "Federal grant recipients must maintain ADA compliance and anti-discrimination procedures. When they systematically violate these requirements, we trigger both civil rights enforcement and contract breach penalties." The irony was delicious. Bryce's own federal funding had created the legal framework for his destruction, like handing someone the rope to hang themselves with detailed instructions. The financial investigation read like a master class in creative bookkeeping. Delilah's forensic accountant, paid for with state resources naturally, had uncovered fraud that would have impressed the guys who invented creative accounting. $180,000 in questionable expenses over 2 years, with Bryce's construction company charging prices that made Pentagon contractors look reasonable. Emergency tree removals at $8,000 each when any reasonable person would have called Danny and his chainsaw for $1,200 total. A fountain repair requiring $15,000 in specialized equipment rental to replace what was essentially a fish tank pump. "Here's something most people don't realize," Patricia said, pointing to federal grant fine print that looked like it was written by lawyers who hated fun. "When organizations receiving federal funding engage in systematic discrimination, individual board members face personal liability under Section 1983 civil rights violations." She paused for dramatic effect, probably savoring the legal poetry. "Bryce isn't just facing organizational penalties, he's looking at personal financial ruin that could follow him for decades." The media coordination was more choreographed than a Broadway musical. Jamie had spent weeks coordinating with state capitol press corps, timing releases for maximum news cycle impact during the legislative session. A documentary filmmaker specializing in civil rights abuses had positioned cameras around our neighborhood like we were filming the next great American justice story. Social media campaigns weighted with hashtags like #HOA accountability, ready to launch simultaneously with legal filings for that perfect storm of public outrage. Community organizing had evolved from Pete's after-hours hardware store meetings into something resembling a civilian intelligence network. 23 families had documented harassment with federal quality evidence files, complete with timestamps that would have made court reporters weep with joy. Mrs. Morgan's security camera network provided surveillance coverage that could have detected a mosquito landing on Bryce's precious Lexus. "Technical preparation is where government resources really shine," Delilah explained, showing me communication systems that looked like they belonged in spy movies. Legal documents were prepared for simultaneous filing across multiple jurisdictions, press packets ready for instant distribution, and backup plans for contingencies including Bryce attempting to flee or destroy evidence. The state IT department had provided secure channels that made our previous WhatsApp group look like sending smoke signals. My role transformation from angry construction worker to community organizer had been perfect cover for a sophisticated government operation. I'd unknowingly become the authentic face of grassroots resistance while learning enough disability rights law to help other residents navigate their harassment situations. The beautiful irony was that my genuine outrage had provided ideal camouflage for what was essentially a federal sting operation. Psychological preparation involved media training that turned affected residents into effective witnesses, legal coaching for complex civil rights procedures, and stress management for the upcoming public confrontation. Delilah practiced returning to public speaking after months of strategic privacy, while federal attorneys prepared intervention protocols if Bryce attempted witness intimidation. Intelligence gathering had revealed this wasn't Bryce's first rodeo. Background checks showed similar schemes at his previous Kansas City HOA, where he'd been quietly forced out after financial irregularities that followed patterns identical to our situation. Pending lawsuits in other states suggested a career built on exploiting legal loopholes and terrorizing residents who couldn't fight back. "The timeline reads like a NASA launch sequence," Delilah said, pointing to schedules that would have impressed military planners. 2 weeks to complete evidence collection, 1 week for coordinated legal filings, then public revelation at Bryce's own emergency meeting where he plans to humiliate us. The perfect trap. Bryce orchestrating his own public execution while thinking he was finally crushing the neighborhood troublemakers. Bryce's desperation reached new heights when he called an emergency HOA meeting to vote on a $500 monthly special assessment for every household. The man was literally trying to tax the neighborhood into funding his legal defense against our frivolous lawsuit, like some kind of feudal lord demanding tribute from peasants who dared question his authority. The meeting notice gave residents exactly 48 hours to prepare. Barely legal under Missouri HOA laws, but typical Bryce operating procedure when he wanted to ram something through before people could organize opposition. "We need immediate funds for legal defense and community protection," he announced to anyone who'd listen, his voice carrying that nasal whine that made fingernails on chalkboards sound melodic. The smell of his desperation mixed with too much cologne as he canvassed the neighborhood like a politician promising everything and delivering nothing. He claimed our attacks on community standards threatened everyone's property values, conveniently ignoring that his own corruption had already scared away 2 potential buyers who'd heard about the neighborhood drama. But financial warfare was just his opening move. The sabotage escalated to levels that would have impressed Cold War spies. Contractors mysteriously damaged a water line near Delilah's house during routine maintenance, flooding her yard and creating a muddy mess that made wheelchair navigation impossible. The smell of chlorinated water and diesel fuel from their equipment lingered for days while they took their sweet time with repairs that should have taken hours. Then came the power outage that magically affected only our block during a heat wave, leaving us without air conditioning while Delilah's medical equipment ran on backup batteries. The electric company claimed it was scheduled maintenance they'd somehow forgotten to notify residents about, despite Mrs. Morgan's security cameras clearly showing utility trucks arriving after the outage began. Even our mail delivery got mysteriously delayed whenever important legal documents were expected, forcing us to drive to the post office like we lived in some third-world dictatorship. My visible countermoves had to look desperate while actually serving Delilah's master plan. I organized petition drives against the special assessment, going door to door with the righteous anger of someone who didn't know his sister controlled the entire chessboard. Those community meetings at Pete's hardware store grew to 30-plus attendees, with residents sharing horror stories that would have made a documentary about suburban tyranny. Every harassment incident got documented with timestamps and photos, creating an evidence file that federal prosecutors would later call disturbingly comprehensive. The character assassination campaign reached levels of creativity that almost impressed me. Bryce spread rumors about my violent tendencies based on absolutely nothing except his own paranoid fantasies. He suggested Delilah was exploiting her disability for personal gain, apparently unaware that calling the governor of Missouri a faker was the kind of stupidity that gets people investigated by multiple federal agencies. His masterpiece was claiming we were outside agitators funded by radical organizations. Technically true if you count the state government as radical, which Bryce probably did. Meanwhile, Delilah's silent preparation reached military precision levels. State investigators had been gathering evidence for weeks under the cover of routine grant compliance reviews that Bryce welcomed with the enthusiasm of someone who thought he was getting a pat on the head. Federal civil rights attorneys prepared intervention protocols that would make Bryce's restraining order look like a parking ticket. Press materials sat ready for coordinated release that would hit every major news outlet simultaneously. The community resistance had evolved into something beautiful. Mrs. Morgan's security footage revealed Bryce conducting late-night sabotage activities with all the stealth of a drunk elephant, providing evidence that would later support criminal charges. Jamie's articles in the local paper exposed financial irregularities with surgical precision, each story building public pressure like a slowly tightening noose. The Facebook group had grown to 400 members sharing abuse stories that painted a picture of systematic oppression worthy of federal intervention. But Bryce's paranoid behavior was providing the most damaging evidence. He'd hired private investigators to follow me like I was some kind of international spy, creating surveillance records that demonstrated the extent of his harassment campaign. His attempts to access our financial records through official HOA business violated multiple privacy laws while generating paper trails that prosecutors would use to establish criminal intent. The legal pressure was mounting from directions Bryce couldn't even see. Patricia's injunction against the special assessment was just the opening move in a coordinated legal assault involving state auditors, federal investigators, and civil rights attorneys. The Department of Justice had opened a formal review based on our discrimination complaint, while state prosecutors examined potential criminal charges for grant fraud that could land Bryce in federal prison. Financial discovery had revealed the full scope of his theft: $240,000 in questionable HOA expenses, with his construction company receiving inflated contracts totaling $180,000 over 2 years. Board members had received consulting fees that looked suspiciously like hush money, while federal grant funds appeared to have financed personal expenses including Bryce's Lexus payments. The beautiful trap was that every desperate move Bryce made created more evidence for his eventual prosecution. He thought he was fighting neighborhood troublemakers, but he was actually documenting federal crimes while the governor of Missouri took detailed notes. Bryce's final gambit was scheduling what he grandly called a community safety meeting at City Hall, complete with formal invitations to the mayor, city council, and local media. The man actually thought he was orchestrating his moment of triumph, planning to present irrefutable evidence of our disruptive behavior before expelling us from HOA common areas permanently. His invitation list read like he was hosting a political rally, complete with construction company partners invited to witness what he called his decisive victory over troublemakers. The smear campaign reached levels of creativity that bordered on performance art. Flyers appeared throughout the neighborhood claiming I had a documented history of workplace violence, completely fabricated but printed on official-looking letterhead that gave it fake credibility. He suggested Delilah was a professional victim seeking lawsuit settlements, apparently unaware that accusing the governor of Missouri of fraud was the kind of stupidity that gets people audited by the IRS for the rest of their natural lives. The crown jewel was his theory that we were outside agitators, funded by radical disability organizations trying to destroy traditional family values, because nothing says traditional values like bulldozing wheelchair ramps at dawn. My final visible preparations had to maintain the illusion that we were desperate underdogs making a last stand. I coordinated with 30-plus supporters to attend the meeting, preparing an emotional presentation about harassment timelines that would have made a jury weep. Character witnesses included my employer, our pastor, and neighbors brave enough to speak truth to petty power. The plan was for me to deliver a heartfelt appeal about my sister's dignity while she sat quietly in her wheelchair, looking like the vulnerable victim Bryce thought he was destroying. But behind the scenes, Delilah's shadow coordination had reached the sophistication of a military operation. Attorney General investigators positioned themselves throughout the expected audience, ready to serve subpoenas the moment legal immunity expired. Media packets had been distributed to state capitol press corps, with embargo dates timed for maximum impact. Federal civil rights attorneys prepared to intervene if Bryce attempted witness intimidation, while backup security stood ready for potential confrontation. Bryce's overconfidence was so complete it approached clinical delusion. He believed his minor political connections, a county commissioner, a city councilman, and a state representative's aide, would support him against what he saw as welfare cheats and troublemakers. His construction company partners arrived early to witness what they thought would be a masterclass in community leadership. The man had even prepared a victory speech about protecting community standards that he planned to deliver after our public humiliation. Community mobilization had transformed Pete's hardware store into resistance headquarters, with supporters carpooling to the meeting like they were attending a revolution. Mrs. Morgan coordinated neighborhood logistics with the efficiency of someone organizing a military deployment. Jamie arranged live streaming equipment for immediate social media distribution, while the documentary filmmaker positioned cameras to capture what she sensed would be historic footage. The legal trap had reached completion with surgical precision. All harassment incidents were documented with federal agencies. Financial audit results revealed criminal liability for grant fraud, and civil rights violations had been thoroughly established through months of systematic abuse. Delilah had learned something from years in politics that Bryce never understood. When you're going to destroy someone, you make absolutely certain they can never recover. Behind-the-scenes maneuvering had reached crescendo levels. State investigators had interviewed HOA board members who revealed uncomfortable details about Bryce's financial schemes under immunity agreements. Federal prosecutors reviewed potential criminal charges that could result in decades of prison time, while media embargoes prepared to lift simultaneously with legal action for maximum public impact. Bryce's final harassment escalation provided the perfect evidence for federal prosecution. He threatened to have us arrested for trespassing at a public meeting, apparently unaware that City Hall belongs to taxpayers, not HOA presidents with delusions of grandeur. Claims that we weren't legitimate residents due to violations sounded like segregation-era legal arguments that would horrify federal civil rights attorneys. His veiled threats about permanent solutions were recorded by multiple devices and would later support criminal conspiracy charges. The psychological buildup was reaching movie-like proportions. Bryce exhibited manic confidence that reminded observers of dictators on the eve of revolution, completely oblivious to the forces gathering against him. Marcus appeared visibly stressed and defeated, playing his role perfectly while knowing his sister controlled every aspect of the upcoming confrontation. Community supporters gathered with nervous energy, sensing historic significance without understanding the full scope of what was about to unfold. Technical surveillance had documented pre-meeting intimidation attempts with quality that would have impressed federal investigators. Hidden cameras captured threatening statements that established criminal intent, while live streaming equipment prepared for immediate social media distribution of whatever dramatic events were about to unfold. Professional photography was arranged to document what Delilah privately called the end of Bryce Kellerman's reign of terror. The stage was set for maximum impact revelation. Meeting scheduled for 7 p.m. with expected attendance over 100 people, including media representatives who had no idea they were about to witness the governor of Missouri destroying a small-town tyrant in real time. Bryce planned a 20-minute presentation exposing the siblings as community threats, completely unaware that his target would be revealing herself as the most powerful person in the state. City Hall was packed beyond capacity with 120 residents, media crews, and officials, the air thick with anticipation and the smell of industrial floor cleaner mixed with nervous sweat. Bryce had orchestrated this moment like a dictator planning a propaganda rally, complete with his PowerPoint presentation loaded and ready on the projector. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as he adjusted his tie for the third time, practically vibrating with the confidence of someone who thought he was about to deliver the performance of his lifetime. "Ladies and gentlemen," Bryce began with theatrical flourish, his nasal voice echoing through the packed room as he clicked through photos of our violations. "Tonight we address the cancer that's been eating away at our community values." The projector hummed while he displayed before and after shots of Delilah's destroyed ramp, describing it as an unauthorized structure that threatened neighborhood safety standards. His voice carried the smug satisfaction of someone who thought he was delivering a death blow to troublemakers who dared challenge his authority. He demanded the HOA board vote to permanently ban these disruptive elements from all community spaces, gesturing toward us like a prosecutor pointing at convicted criminals. The man actually used the phrase, "Some people think rules don't apply to them," while staring directly at my sister, apparently oblivious that he was about to learn exactly how rules work when you're sitting across from the person who writes them. That's when I delivered my emotional testimony, playing my role perfectly as the desperate brother fighting for his sister's dignity. I spoke about watching her crawl up front steps while neighbors pretended not to notice, about daily fines that threatened our family's financial survival, about the systematic harassment that had turned our home into a prison. My voice cracked with genuine emotion as I described the sound of that bulldozer tearing apart her independence at dawn, the audience shifting uncomfortably as the human cost of Bryce's tyranny became impossible to ignore. Then Mayor Davidson stepped to the microphone with a smile that should have been Bryce's first warning that something was terribly wrong. "Before we proceed with tonight's business," he announced with barely contained excitement, "I'd like to introduce a surprise guest who's been following this situation with great interest." The room fell silent except for the mechanical whir of news cameras turning toward the back entrance. "Please welcome Governor Delilah Morrison." The audible gasp that swept through the room sounded like air being sucked out of a collapsing building. Bryce's face went through a spectrum of colors that would have impressed a chameleon, starting with confusion and rapidly progressing through shock, horror, and what I can only describe as the look of someone realizing they've been juggling live grenades. Media cameras pivoted toward my sister like flowers following sunlight, their electronic flashes creating a strobe effect that made the moment feel surreal. Delilah wheeled herself to the microphone with the calm authority of someone who'd been planning this moment for months. "Mr. Kellerman," she began in the voice that had delivered budget addresses and policy speeches, "you've been systematically harassing the governor of Missouri for 3 months. I hope the experience has been educational." The room erupted in chaos that would have made a political convention look peaceful. Residents who'd been cowering in fear of HOA retaliation suddenly found their voices, while Bryce stood frozen like a deer caught in headlights driven by federal prosecutors. His mouth opened and closed wordlessly, producing no sound except a strangled whimper that microphones mercifully didn't pick up. "I control $50 million in annual HOA funding statewide," Delilah continued with surgical precision, "including the $280,000 your association received last year. Every federal grant you've accepted came with specific requirements for ADA compliance and anti-discrimination measures that you've systematically violated." Her words cut through the room like a blade, each sentence another nail in Bryce's political coffin. That's when the legal hammer fell with biblical force. Attorney General investigators identified themselves throughout the audience, rising like coordinated dancers to serve subpoenas for financial records. Federal marshals presented warrants that had been prepared weeks in advance, while civil rights attorneys announced class action lawsuits that would make Bryce's life a legal nightmare for decades. State auditors declared emergency investigations into grant compliance that would freeze HOA assets pending criminal review. Bryce's meltdown was spectacular in its completeness. He attempted to deny everything, claiming misunderstanding and political retaliation, while security moved closer to contain what looked like an impending psychological break. His accusations of abuse of power rang hollow in a room filled with residents who'd witnessed months of his systematic harassment. When he started shouting threats about lawsuits and career destruction, security finally removed him as he devolved into incoherent ranting about constitutional rights and government overreach. The community reaction was instantaneous and overwhelming. A standing ovation lasted 5 minutes, with residents who'd been terrorized for months finally free to express their relief and gratitude. HOA board members resigned en masse rather than face federal prosecution, while Mrs. Morgan emerged as unanimous choice for interim president. The Facebook group exploded with celebration posts as news spread beyond our neighborhood to communities across the state. Within hours, national media picked up the story of a governor fighting back against discrimination, turning our small-town drama into a symbol of justice triumphing over petty tyranny. 1 week after Bryce's spectacular public meltdown, the entire neighborhood gathered for what looked like the world's most therapeutic barn raising. 47 neighbors contributed labor, materials, or enough food to feed a construction crew as we rebuilt Delilah's wheelchair ramp in a single weekend. The sweet smell of fresh cedar mixed with barbecue smoke and the rhythmic symphony of hammers creating something beautiful instead of destroying it. Pete donated all the hardware while Danny handled electrical work, transforming what had been a symbol of discrimination into a neighborhood centerpiece that visitors now stopped to photograph. The legal consequences for Bryce unfolded with the relentless precision of federal justice. 18 months in federal prison for grant fraud and civil rights violations, plus 3 years probation and $250,000 in restitution payments that would follow him like a financial shadow. His construction company declared bankruptcy, owing the community fund every stolen penny, while his contractor's license got permanently revoked faster than you could say karma incarnate. The man slithered out of state after release, but federal conviction records follow you everywhere in the digital age. Community transformation happened so dramatically it made Hollywood endings look realistic. Mrs. Morgan's unanimous election as HOA president ushered in bylaws prioritizing accessibility and community support over petty rule enforcement. Monthly potluck dinners replaced harassment campaigns, with the smell of homemade casseroles and genuine laughter filling the community center where Bryce had once orchestrated his tyrannical presentations. Property values increased 12% within 6 months, not because of oppressive regulations, but because people actually wanted to live somewhere known for protecting neighbors instead of terrorizing them. Statewide impact exceeded even Delilah's political dreams. Delilah's law passed with bipartisan support that surprised cynical legislators, requiring HOA board training on disability rights and creating a state ombudsman office with actual enforcement teeth. Whistleblower protections for residents meant future Bryces would face organized resistance instead of isolated victims. The legislation became a model for 17 other states dealing with similar suburban tyranny epidemics. Personal healing became the most beautiful part of this nightmare turned triumph. Marcus channeled his protective rage into building a construction company specializing in accessibility modifications, helping families across 3 states navigate their own barrier removal projects. Delilah's approval ratings hit 73% after showing voters the kind of spine they'd hoped for when they elected her. Their sibling relationship emerged stronger than ever, bonded by crisis and seasoned with mutual respect that had been missing during years of him treating her like someone who needed protection instead of someone fully capable of protecting herself. The Community Benefit Project transformed stolen federal money into genuine neighborhood improvements. Accessibility upgrades for 12 additional homes created a community where mobility devices moved freely without architectural hostility. The community garden flourished on former violation-prone common areas, producing vegetables and friendships while erasing memories of Bryce's midnight enforcement patrols. Annual Ramp Day celebrations now raise funds for disabled residents statewide while serving barbecue that attracts visitors from neighboring counties. Media legacy ensured this David versus Goliath story would inspire others facing similar battles. Jamie's Pulitzer Prize-winning investigation exposed HOA abuse in 23 states, creating accountability ripples that reached federal policy discussions. The Emmy-winning documentary Bulldozed became required viewing in civil rights law courses, while Riverside Heights transformed into a pilgrimage site for communities fighting their own petty dictators. 1 year later, Delilah uses her ramp daily, the smooth incline a testament to dignity triumphing over discrimination. The bronze plaque on the handrail reads, "In memory of those who stood up, honoring everyone who'd faced down neighborhood tyrants." Marcus runs a thriving business building accessibility while teaching others that the best revenge is living well and helping others do the same. The sound of children playing on the ramp, now the neighborhood's favorite gathering spot, fills the air where bulldozers once brought destruction. Every morning, the American flag flies over a community that learned the difference between rules that protect and rules that oppress. Mrs. Morgan's security cameras now capture block parties instead of harassment, while Pete's hardware store has become an unofficial community center where neighbors plan improvements instead of plotting resistance. Have you survived HOA nightmare stories that make Bryce look reasonable? Share your experience in the comments. You might be surprised how many rights you actually have when dealing with these suburban dictators. Hit subscribe to HOA Stories and ring that notification bell because next week I'm covering the small-town mayor who discovered his city council was embezzling millions and his revenge was absolutely legendary. Remember, every bully in petty power counts on you feeling helpless, but there's always someone they answer to, and sometimes that someone has been taking very detailed notes.
Thank you for tuning in to HOA Stories, where neighbors stand up against HOA Karens and karma comes a-knocking. If you like this story, hit that like button, share your thoughts below, and subscribe for more HOA tales and real-life neighborhood drama each week.